every school employee, period, is going to see at least a 4% pay raise. That's good. We'd like to see it better, but hey, that's a step in the right direction.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
There were some education bills that passed the legislature and have headed to the governor's mansion for signature. One of them included a significant pay raise for teachers. Adam, can you talk to us about some of the education updates in Alabama?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that since we do have, I would say, some degree of good news. I know it's easy for us to be Debbie Downers about Alabama politics because, frankly, there's not a lot good that comes out of Alabama politics. But in good news, there is a record education trust fund budget. And my understanding is it's about a 7% increase overall to last year's budget, which is definitely a step in the right direction. Now, you put that in context that my understanding is inflation's at about 8% year over year. So, you know, I know what the headlines are saying, and I know what the education groups are going to be saying to their members, and I get that, but this is not a time to just pop champagne and blow up balloons and you know, rest assured that everything's been fixed, because it's far from that. It's a huge investment in Alabama public schools, and I think that's, like I said, a step in the right direction. There's going to be some important resources that are added, including mental health coordinators. They're actually going to fund the technology coordinator positions for every district, which, especially now in 2022, very important that school districts actually have the staff to deal with technology and distance learning and integrate technology into their schools. There's going to be an increase in pre-K funding, which is absolutely needed. If you're not aware, Alabama has what's called First Class pre-K program, and it actually is first class. It's nationally recognized as a very effective preschool program. The kids who go to it do very well, and there's some evidence that those benefits actually persist throughout their education. Now it starts to fade away as socioeconomic obstacles get in the way. But a kid who's gone through an Alabama First Class pre-K program is going to be in a much better position for kindergarten and first grade than a kid who hasn't. So that's good news. More money. I think about 20-something million is being infused to pre-K. But my understanding is that raises the number of the access from about 42% to 45% of Alabama's eligible children. Now, they didn't have no fancy numeracy act when I was in school, but I can do the math and realize that 45% ain't 100%. And if we're serious about improving education in the state, 100% of children should be able to go to a high-quality pre-K program at no cost. That should be just a baseline demand coming from all of us involved in education. And so I think, and I remember having a discussion with Representative Anthony Daniels about this a few years ago, and he is a big pre-K advocate. We have some pretty significant disagreements, I would say, but I like Anthony on a personal level, and I agree with him about the importance of pre-K, and he felt like the education community was not going hard enough on pre-K, in part because if the Republicans are going to constantly bash you over test scores and constantly try to hold you accountable for these test scores, which we know mostly reflect poverty and other socioeconomic issues, but if that's the game we're playing, we know that investing in pre-K can help us play this game more or less. It shouldn't be a game. This is families' lives. This is the future of children. But Republicans and Democrats, to some degree, love to play games when it comes to children and education. So I'm getting sidetracked there. But taking it back to good news, teacher raises. Every teacher, every school employee, period, is going to see at least a 4% pay raise. That's good. We'd like to see it better, but hey, that's a step in the right direction. One area where a lot of progress was made was in revising the state salary matrix. So teachers, counselors, librarians, they're all kind of classified the same as far as pay is concerned. And there's a state minimum salary matrix. Every school district in the state has to pay at least that. They can pay more. Some do, some don't. But what they did is actually revise a lot of the steps in there so that every year folks will be seeing pay raises, because as it exists now, you may move a step in your experience, but you're actually only seeing a step raise every 3 years. And now it has been revised to where folks will actually see a cost of living increase on an annual basis as they move up in experience. They added some steps at the back end because what we've seen, particularly post-COVID, is a flurry of resignations and more accurately, retirements. So teachers who have their years in the retirement system are getting the hell out of here. And the goal is to try to retain those folks. We need to recruit new educators, but you know what? We've got folks in the buildings now that we want to hold on to. And so I hope that this is going to be a step in the right direction. In talking with some educators about this recently, one of the things that we all discussed is that as great as it is to see these pay raises and as necessary and overdue as they are, pay doesn't fix everything. Pay does not alone address working conditions. And so there's still a lot of work to be done on that front. And so that's I'm trying to kind of be nuanced here in that, yes, we have some good news and we need to appreciate that. And I am appreciative of everyone involved, from the legislators down to the lobbyists and the educators themselves advocating for themselves. This build on that and move forward from this new foundation of more investment. Because the context is that we had the second highest cuts to public education in Alabama after the Great Recession. We had increases in health care costs for education employees. We had increases in retirement contributions for education employees, the creation of a Tier 2 retirement system with weaker benefits, and on and on and on. So in a lot of ways, what we're doing is making up for lost ground over the past 10, 15 years. So, don't celebrate just yet as if this is mission accomplished. These are good investments to build off of. I know there was some discussion of divisive concepts and, critical race theory bans. My understanding is the divisive concepts bill did not pass, so that's good. It will come back. The right wing has found a hot button issue that their base really rallies to and responds to, and so rest assured, and legislators. Go ahead.
And especially in the next year, in the first year of the quadrennium, we can expect to see I feel pretty comfortable predicting that we can expect to see a lot of these more controversial bills that were not able to pass this year. A big fight over them in the first year of the quadrennium, because that is when they are the least responsive. That's when they passed the gas tax, right? Wasn't it? It was the first or the second year of the quadrennium. Would they pass a gas tax this year? Hell no. Hell no, they're not going to pass a gas tax this year, but it's been, 3 or 4 years ago, and so it's a lot easier to, for people to forget about it. And so... I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's true. The last year of the quadrennium, the election year, they're all hustling to get out of the session so they can go back to campaigning. So some of the more controversial bills, some of which we covered in depth on this show, thankfully were delayed enough by activists and were, just dragged out in the process to where they didn't make it through the finish line. Thank God for some of these bills. But all this bad shit will be coming back next year. And next year it may be the one where we have to be even more careful for those reasons you outlined.
So I expect to see the school choice come back, with a vengeance. The big school choice bill by Del Marsh didn't make it through. But again, folks, we already have school voucher programs through the Alabama Accountability Act, which is both a private school voucher program and a tax cut program for the wealthy. So these things are building on a context that was already weak for public education. And so while we're moving forward in many areas, there's a lot of work to be done. And the goal should be bottom-up decision-making, power to the educators who do the job, who do the work day in and day out, who know their students, who know the families and communities. They are the experts, not legislators in Montgomery, not bureaucrats sitting at the State Department of Education. And there are some good people there, don't get me wrong, but those folks don't have all the answers. Right. It's going to be how can educators organize and come together collectively to, yes, build on the pay raises, build on benefit improvements, but start to address some key issues of working conditions and start to address the lack of input that they have into our education system so that we can build a public school system that is truly more public and democratic. I think those are really the missions that we have moving forward. And the last thing I'll say on education is I know there's a lot of talk on right-wing radio in Yellowhammer News and those kind of places about the Literacy Act. The Literacy Act delay was sent to the governor, and the whole reason behind that, the Literacy Act was a pretty extensive legislation a couple years ago about literacy, as the name implies, and there were some good things in the bill, like hiring more reading coaches and investing resources in teaching literacy. There were also some things that were dubious, I would say, at best, one of which is the third grade retention component, which says essentially if little Johnny or little Jane doesn't pass the test and doesn't, prove themselves to be proficient in literacy according to our definitions, they would be held back and have to repeat the third grade. Some other states have this, some don't. The true academic research behind this practice, I would say, is a mixed bag at best. But that has been delayed. I know AEA got a lot of flack for pushing for that delay, but y'all, it's just common sense. If you talk to teachers, the 2019-2020 school year, well, that got jacked up starting in March. Folks were sent home. Then you look at the 2020-2021 school year, last school year. Again, there was tons of disruptions. Vaccines weren't even available until the second semester. There was outbreaks in district after district. There were some that were trying to do remote. Some were coming back and then having to send them home again. All that to say, the last few years would not really be a decent baseline to start this punitive approach of the retention. Mm-hmm. So the goal would be, let's have a couple somewhat more normal school years and a couple more years to actually implement the resources and use the resources and follow the Literacy Act before we start holding kids back or, blaming schools or teachers. So that's the rationale behind it. I don't see any massive push from educators to, absolve themselves of responsibility or accountability. I don't think that's the case at all. But as per usual in right-wing media, they like to come up with their own narratives and their own tropes that they can run with, one of which, of course, in Alabama is the perennial fear and hatred of the Alabama Education Association, the AEA. And I won't go too deep on that beyond just saying the AEA that exists on the pages of Yellowhammer and on right-wing radio is very, very far from the reality that exists with AEA.
Yeah.
I wish AEA was the militant, progressive, all-power, puppet master in Montgomery that they make them out to be, but it's pretty far from the case. So that's all I have to say there. Lots of good news, but lots of work to be done. And what I would like to see is educators coming together to organize and build a bottom-up grassroots movement, to build on these kind of victories, but to really expand elsewhere and to start to link up our needs for public schools with our broader public good. Because until we start to address that, we're always going to be under fire. We're always going to have a huge target on our back. Every year, these statistics come out and say, well, Alabama's 49th, or Alabama's 50th, Alabama's 51st. Every year these come out, it only gives more ammunition for the privatizers and for the corporate reformers and all the union busters, everyone else who's aligned against public education and aligned against public sector workers. Until we address that, we're always going to be fighting from the defensive.
Right.
And that's why it's important that educators have a movement that can link up with a broader working class movement to start to address the deep poverty in this state, the lack of health care in this state, the lack of jobs and unions and infrastructure and transportation in this state, a racist police state that over-incarcerates our brothers and sisters, the parents of these children, and so on. And so I think those are the types of the areas that we have to look at moving forward. So good news to report, but a lot to work on. And, we'll stay tuned. Stay tuned, especially next year. All this bad shit that just barely didn't make it, it'll be coming back with a vengeance, and we'll have to fight that much harder to keep it out.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.